The whisper. It started as a faint sound, so distant that Julia barely noticed it. She was sitting in her living room, engrossed in a novel, when she first heard its soft, almost imperceptible whisper, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. She paused, glancing up from her book, but the house was silent. Shrugging it off, she returned to her reading. Over the next few days, the whisper persisted. It was always faint, always distant, just at the edge of her hearing. Sometimes, it sounded like her name being called softly. Other times, it was just a murmur, an unintelligible string of words. Julia tried to ignore it, telling herself it was nothing more than her imagination. But as the days went by, the whisper grew louder. One evening, as she was cooking dinner, the whisper seemed to come from the hallway. Julia stopped chopping vegetables and listened intently. There it was again. Clearer this time, Julia. The sound sent a shiver down her spine. She walked to the hallway, peering into the dimly lit corridor. It was empty. She returned to the kitchen, trying to shake off the unease. But now, the whisper was no longer distant. It followed her from room to room, growing louder and more insistent. Julia, it called, sometimes from behind her, other times from the next room. She felt like she was being watched, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. One night, unable to sleep, Julia lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The whisper had become a constant presence, hovering at the edge of her consciousness. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block it out, but it only grew louder. Julia, it breathed, so close now that she could almost feel the breath on her skin. Terrified, she pulled the covers over her head, her heart pounding. The whisper was right behind her now, each word a cold gust of air against her ear. Julia, it whispered again, the voice low and chilling. Slowly, she turned, her breath catching in her throat. There was nothing there. The room was empty, but the sense of dread was overwhelming, pressing down on her like a physical weight. She could still feel the breath on her ear, icy and unnatural. She lay there, paralyzed by fear, until the first light of dawn crept through the window. As the sun rose, the whisper faded, retreating to the edges of her hearing. Exhausted, she finally fell into a fitful sleep. The next day, Julia decided she couldn't stay in the house any longer. She packed a bag and left, determined to escape the whisper that had tormented her. But even as she drove away, she could hear it, faint and distant once more. Julia, it called, promising that no matter where she went, it would always find her.